Welcome to the 50th NECTA convention. It's a pleasure having you. In an effort to present our programming in a new light in our 50th year, we decided to do things a little differently this year with a plated lunch. We're going to have two keynote panels back to back. The first being a distinguished panel of media experts. And for the sake of time, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Burnell from NECN, who will moderate our first and our second panel.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce the panelists we have up here. To my left, immediate left, Daniela Altameri. She is the State House reporter for the Hartford Courant. Next to her is Trent Spinner. He is the executive editor of the Union Leader in New Hampshire. And then we have Jeff Bartlett, the president and general manager of WMUR. And at the end, Tom E. Curran of NBC Sports Boston, a colleague of mine, all under the NBC Universal Comcast family. Thank you for joining us. Our subject today is the changing media landscape, future trends for television, print, and digital news. And I think I can safely say, let's begin with, we are all digital news. We're not print, you're print, but we are all digital news. Daniela, how have things changed for you? I mean, you've been writing about the Capitol in Connecticut for years. How have things changed over the years?
They've changed so much. It's amazing. I mean, we are now, as you mentioned, we're all videographers, we're photographers, we're tweeters, we're Facebook livers, we're doing all that stuff constantly.
And is that true in the television industry up in New Hampshire, Jeff?
Yeah, we spend a great deal of money and time with our web product. You know, that is how most people get the news every day is, you know, from a website. Now, hopefully they come and watch the newscast too, but I can bet they started watching on our website or our app sometime during the day.
And Trent, the Union Leader, I mean, that's the newspaper in New Hampshire, especially around election time, primary time. How are you adapting to this digital world we live in?
So one of the things that I'm really focused on is how we make money from all these people who are reading us online. And the question is, how do you take people who maybe just tune in every 4 years because they care about New Hampshire politics or they care about a presidential primary, and how do you take those occasional readers and make them kind of more loyal readers? And then how do you take those loyal readers and make them subscribers, people who you're actually making money off of? So one of the things that we've really been doing is trying to take the New Hampshire politics, trying to take outdoors, especially in the summertime, and a number of other different things. The Union Leader is very well known for its opinion section, whether or not you like it. And so what we've been doing is trying to develop these audiences, and we have a mini publisher who's in charge of each one of them. So they understand, okay, here are the people who are reading, here's where they're coming from, here's what time they're reading, and here's what type of material that they're reading. And then what we try and do is take those occasional readers and work them down through our funnel to becoming paid subscribers. And it's been a challenge, right? I mean, that's not what newspaper people were generally used to doing. But what we're doing is creating these small mini publisher teams where everyone from the news side to the business side understand these metrics and then how we can actually make money off of this audience.
Let me focus on the opinion aspect of this, and I want to direct this to Tom, because doing sports, and you and I talked a little bit yesterday, opinion has almost become content. And when you put something out about Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, the Red Sox, you get a lot of feedback opinion-wise.
Right, and the assumption is that it's an informed opinion, which with Daniela, for instance, on the State House, if I've been covering the Patriots since 1997 and you know, been in journalism since 1992, and have established, you know, through the other mediums that people can watch a press conference and see that I have a rapport with people, then they say, well, this guy probably knows what he's talking about if he offers an opinion on, you know, the texture or context of how something is. And that's really important because when we talk about, you know, we're alluding to creating publishing teams to give digital voices, well, who are those people who are out there? How well established is their voice with their reputation and reliability? So that's what's so fascinating too, is we have all these organizations, media organizations, but the individual and the identity and who that quote-unquote brand is becomes more and more important because they'll go to a the union leader for a particular writer, or they'll go to the Hartford Courant for Daniela, or they'll come to us for, Evan Drellick on the Red Sox because they trust or like him. So the people become almost outsizedly important. And we saw that at ESPN, where they tried to excise a lot of the personalities because they were getting too damn expensive. So that's been a fascinating thing to do. But you always have to, in my opinion, to close that is, if you have opinion, and you have to be sometimes a columnist, sometimes a newsbreaker, sometimes an analyst, you just can't, you need a consistency that if you're going to put your name on it, whether it be a tweet or Facebook Live or something, that people are going to be able to turn around and say, this guy actually knows what he's talking about, because there's a lot of people out there talking.
Well, and let me ask you this, Daniela, in this age where the phrase fake news, for better or worse, has become ubiquitous in our society, do people trust what you, do you feel that people trust? Do you get feedback that says people trust what you're writing?
I think our brand, I mean, we are the oldest continuously published newspaper. We publish the Declaration of Independence as breaking news stories. So our brand is pretty solid, and yet, there is a lot of cynicism and there is a lot of mistrust. And I think, what we were just talking about, that sort of engagement with the audience is really key. I mean, that's a new thing for us as journalists. We used to sort of sit up on the hill in our newsroom and we would, produce the content and people would read it and maybe we'd get some letters to the editor or some comments at the end of a story. But now it's all about audience engagement. That is sort of the holy grail for us in the news business. We want people to share our stories. We want people to comment on them. We want people to interact with us on them, whether it's on Twitter or another social media channel. So that's really been a huge change for all of us.
Tom?
Just to echo that, that's jarring for a writer too, because over the course of time, if you saw one letter to the editor or one comment at the bottom of your story, you would sit there and go, huh, well, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I clearly have, I know what I know. Now you have a fleet of people who will weigh in, and you have to get your mind around being questioned, criticized, name called, which is fine if you can just keep the context of what this joust with the public has turned into, which is sometimes a joust.
I think for us at the Union Leader, the fake news phenomenon has really pushed us to be better. What we used to just kind of assume that people knew that we, just trust us. We have these anonymous sources, or trust us, we have this unnamed source. It has pushed everyone, I think, in the newsroom to say, wait a second, people don't trust us anymore, and so we need to show our work. And that's one of the things that I've been pushing reporters to do, is to say, look, stuff that we used to assume 2 years ago, stuff that we used to hope that readers would trust us on, you can't do that anymore. And so unless you're actually bringing the reader in, showing them how you got there, showing them where this information came from, they won't trust you. And so I think it's actually, I won't say it's been good for us, but I think it's kind of helped us get back to the basics on some stuff that we had been missing.
Jeff?
Well, one of the problems I have with fake news, and we all have this problem, is that there's so many different sources of news, and there's so much opinion mixed in with the news, and then they see a story that's not like the story they saw on Breitbart or somewhere else, and they go, fake news. Well, it's not fake news. We just have a different set of sources and a different set of information, and we don't have, or we try not to have, opinion in the stories. And opinions are perfectly fine as long as people understand that's the opinion, not a fact. How many of you have heard of a website called The Intercept? You from New York? Did you know about The Intercept 2 months ago? Right, exactly. The Intercept helped a young Democratic socialist knock off a incumbent 9-term congressman in New York's 14th district. And she was interviewed often and early by The Intercept, and also by a website called The Young Turks. And she credits that. Now again, she had a great ground game. She had demographics changing in that district and took advantage of all that. She was very smart, but she credits those people by getting in early and spreading the news of what her candidacy was all about. She was able to knock off the Democratic establishment. Now, and that's great. They also, in addition to printing stories about her, attacked Crowley almost every day with some kind of story. Now again, that's fine. Actually, at the start of our country, most newspapers were political organs anyway. They were started by a candidate or a party, but people knew who was running it for the most part. Now we don't. I don't know what the bias of The Intercept is. It's an interesting website. There's a lot of good stuff there. And there's some stuff that's clearly opinion, and some of it's labeled and some of it's not. But the problem is when our story doesn't look like that story, they think the problem is us, not somebody else. And that's our struggle now with fake news, because anything somebody doesn't like is fake news.
Is that healthy, though, that a website, what you just said, I don't know what their bias is, and that you said that they attacked Crowley almost every day in addition to the positive stories they did on his opponent. People can know what the editorial opinion of the union leader is, but that doesn't leak over into the news stories and the news coverage. So is what The Intercept did right?
I don't know if it's right or wrong, and you're right. The editorial policy of the union leader, what you see on the editorial page, is maybe not what you see in the stories. But with The Intercept, it all seems to be run together, and that's sort of the issue is, can you tell what's an opinion, what's a sort of predetermined plan of attack on one politician to support another. Again, as long as people know that, that's fine. They understand it. But you can't look at that and then say that our story is wrong because we didn't cover it that way.
I think it's actually healthy for places, for mainstream media outlets, to have stuff like this, because it helps us be able to say, hey, look, this is our brand, and you know what you're getting with the union leader. You know what you're getting at MUR. And so I think that actually is good for us, because when there are all these sites and you don't know where they're coming from, and even though your aunt or your crazy uncle may have posted it on his Facebook page, you still there are a good number of people, and these are the people that we're targeting, who care about real news, who want to make sure that somebody has vetted it, that there's been an editing process, and they're willing to pay for it. And so those are the types of people who see stuff like The Intercept and say, you know what, I don't know where this is coming from, and I'm willing to pay $15, $20 a month to make sure that I do know where my news is coming from. Those are our people.
Daniela, let me ask you this, because we talked a little bit about this out in the hallway. Are we at a point where people are seeing the process, whereas 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they didn't see the process that you went through, that I went through as a reporter, in interviewing different people, deciding what's true, what's not, getting the other side. Now, as soon as you get that interview, you put it out there, get it out there.
Yeah, and I think you're right. What you were saying earlier, just in terms of, people want to see, they want to look behind the curtain. They want to see and be able to judge for themselves, is this, valid information? How did the reporter get this? How is this, who are these sources? How is this sort of structured? And I think that's driven, as we talk a lot about the rise of fake news, but it's also sort of a golden age in journalism. There's been amazing investigative reporting being done now, and that is sort of the sort of inverse of what we were just talking about. And I think, as you were saying, this sort of hunger from consumers to know, what is this information? Where's it coming from? How can I judge? Has it been vetted? What type of, process did it go through? And I think people really hunger for that. At the same time, perhaps a different audience is looking for the fake news.
And Tom, a question for you. Do you get pushback from athletes because things are so immediate? They're almost addressing their fans day in, day out on Twitter, on Instagram, everywhere else. Do you get pushback from athletes over stuff that gets out there, maybe that they don't want to see get out there, or that got out there without them being able to process it?
I think probably I would have more so a decade ago, but I think that athletes, given their demographics, understand the way media works now. So we are more, we're more seen as co-conspirators, or people who they can align themselves with. For instance, I do a TV show, and Devin McCourty, who's a Patriots captain, is on there. His brother Jason may be coming on. We'll have different guests. I did a book with Julian Edelman. Gerard Mayo's on. So those players who are in the locker room, who I cover, see that, and they understand they have a finite amount of time in their profession, and they understand that this is a good, lily pad to jump to afterwards as a media. So there's not a lot of pushback. There's inquisitiveness on their part, but they've also done an excellent job of managing their own messages,
right,
which we've seen with Tom Brady this summer, as enigmatic as it can be, on Instagram, on Facebook, on different ways. But you also can parse what they're delivering in the same way people parse our stuff and say, well, they clearly have a self-serving agenda, so how do we know? So that's why we still have a role. And that's why I think these organizations, all of them right down the line, have that, the backbone, the spine of it all, has to be information and news. That somewhere on your website, you got to be able to find the objective news story that came out that's related to it. And I think it's hard in what we're doing as a television station, because we're on with opinion, with radio shows, we're putting out videos, we're putting out polls. So throughout the course of the day, there's a lot of different things that get thrown out under the NBC Sports Boston umbrella, but we do need to have a spine that says this is where your information is. This is what we know, not what we think.
Do you feel that athletes would rather go directly to their fans through social media than let it be filtered through you and your colleagues?
Depends. Again, that's where the value of an individual is. I think even with a politician, perhaps, Daniela, maybe you can speak to this. If the athlete trusts you, if the athlete has a relationship with you, if he's seen your work, it's seen you on TV, and that's why it's harder for a younger person maybe to get ahead. They haven't seen you on these different platforms, then they'll trust you. And that can continue to bolster your reputation. So you have to start with small and pick the guy who's going to be a star in a couple of years, who might be a 4th-round pick. And if you develop a great relationship, or a 6th-round pick in 1999, and 18 years later, you have a pretty good pipeline into his thinking.
And we're in a situation now where the biggest presence on Twitter is the President of the United States, and he is bypassing all of us to go straight to his constituents. Jeff, how does that affect how we do our job?
Well, he's also bypassing his own staff. And so they get a lot of confused messages, which makes it harder for us. We have to report what the president said, but all the spokespeople for the White House are saying something slightly different or sometimes completely different. And that creates a huge amount of confusion for us. And so we're not sure what's the real line. What is the real philosophy behind this statement? Was it what the president tweeted out at 2:30 in the morning, or was it what the State Department and his press people said 7 hours later? And so it's very difficult to keep track of what's what.
What's been interesting for us is, and I know there are some New Hampshire state legislators in here, so I won't get myself in trouble, but there are people on the local level who say, I'm going to do the Trump thing, and I'm going to I don't need you. I don't need the press. I'm going to skip MUR. I'm going to skip the union leader, and I'm going to win this election with my Twitter account. And we're just like, good luck, guys. It's so hard to build that audience. The president was able to do it because he's been a reality show. I mean, he has the audience already. But to say, I'm going to launch a campaign and I'm going to spend $10,000 on whatever, social media advertising, and I'm going to win the election, we have not seen that happen.
And how much of that success is, as you said, he was a reality TV star, he was a well-known person even before that, and his willingness to say just about anything. I mean, can you put that Twitter account out there, Brian Burnell for Congress, and say, I love puppies and babies, and that's going to win you an election?
And that's the problem, is that a lot of these, we have 11 candidates running in one congressional district right now, just on the Democratic side, and everyone's got their one issue. And so because they're just going to social media, because they're not using the microphone of the media, they're just getting whatever. They're getting the people who are for banning a certain product, and people who are for lower taxes, and for these single issue followers on Twitter, where you feel like you have this base, but you really only have a couple of hundred people who are very loud, and you're not reaching a general audience. And that's, I guess we'll see. Maybe I'll be proven wrong during the primary in September, but I think that's going to be an issue for them.
Well, Danielle, let me ask you. We talk in the newsroom a lot about the echo chamber. How valuable is Twitter even to us? Are we just talking to other reporters, to people who are in PR, to legislators, to police departments, that type of thing? And is the general public listening? Are we in an echo chamber situation, do you find?
Perhaps a little bit on Twitter. I think Twitter's a great tool, and I enjoy it, and it's fun, and it's immediate, and it's sort of a little bit looser, and it's a great tool, but it's only one tool. And I think, all these politicians who think they're going to be using social media and bypassing the sort of normal channels, I think you're correct. That doesn't work. We're seeing in Connecticut with the governor's race, there's a lot of candidates running. And what are they doing? Well, they all have their social media teams, and they're doing a lot of that. But they're also spending tens of thousands of dollars on advertising, on cable, cable television, regular television, direct mail, up and down. So the old ways, again, we're in this era of change and disruption, but the old system is still very much in place, I think.
It's funny because how many times have you heard sentence begin with from an editor or somebody, a producer? Twitter's blowing up with ... And you're like, Gronk liked a tweet from someone, so Twitter's blowing up with Gronk liking that tweet, and does that mean he's going to be traded? And my pushback was continuous. A few years ago, I'm not chasing a like of a tweet that I don't even know if he liked that tweet. We're going to spend our whole day talking about the liking of the tweet. But then by the time 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock rolled around, you go through the locker room and no one says anything, and everybody continues to talk about the Gronk tweet like. It's now running. It is driving your day, and you end up finding a way. And I've, kind of come to an uneasy truce with the idea that, all right, we'll start with the Gronk tweet and the liking of it, but we'll either explain why it's ridiculous to spend time on it, or we'll say why there are elements in place that it is noteworthy or newsworthy. So you have to give a nod to the foolishness that 7 people united on Twitter make everybody think has caused this firestorm. But then you can give, and that's where the spin comes in, and that's where the opinion comes in, which is where you have to have reputable and reputation and trusted informed. It's different in sports, believe me. I understand from what you guys are using, but that's anecdotal from someone in the field in a different realm.
It strikes me, too, that we're starting to use social media to some extent to get sources. We'll go on Twitter and say, if you were at this fire, and you can send us some video, and we'll go on Facebook and say, if you know this person who was involved in this situation, could you get in touch with us? Do you guys find we're getting sources or getting information more that starts with social media?
Certainly in a breaking news situation, it's invaluable. I mean, that's really what it's made for. In terms of, long-term sources perhaps, but that sort of immediate on-the-ground, people seeing things, tweeting it, retweeting it, reaching out to them for sure.
But it has to be vetted.
It has to be vetted.
I mean, I think there was a golden day of journalism where there were reporters everywhere, and everyone, there was a reporter at every city hall, and they did beat calls to every police department in the state. I don't know what that looked like, but today there are so many powerful tools, and not just Twitter. There are so many powerful tools that somebody sitting at a desk can figure out what's going on, can find people who are there, who can get photos. And yes, it all has to be vetted. But I think we're actually in this new I think that, I don't know what it used to be like, but I think we're in this new, really powerful age where one reporter can do a ton of work.
And get a ton of eyeballs on that work very quickly. Too quickly, maybe?
Well, we not only find out breaking news, which is great, photos and video sent of fires and wrecks way before we can get there, and that's terrific. But we also get really sometimes, and this especially on Facebook, where people tend to write you long, epistles of their life. But if we ask for somebody, say we're doing something special on this topic. Do you have a perspective? And we get a ton of perspectives, not only that we thought about, but we never even occurred to us. And so we get good material to really make not just breaking news, but more thought-provoking, more deeply thought-out news.
Are people, in that sense, reaching out to all of you more on social media with either why don't you cover this or hey, I have some information? Is that happening more and more?
Absolutely.
And do you is it valuable or is it annoyance or how do you
Maybe
parse through it?
70% valuable, 30% annoyance.
Well, the big problem is when they think they've gotten in touch with us and we don't go cover that in their town. And then the expectation is huge, like, what's wrong with you? You wanted this information, I gave it to you, but we can't go cover every little town in great detail. And so the expectations are raised because they're now communicating with us. Sometimes on a daily basis, we have people we call frequent flyers who are always sending us stuff in one form or another. We know who they are. And they actually send stuff to specific reporters or producers or editors because they know they've had a conversation with them before. But again, the expectation is high, and it's very hard to meet.
Tom, in your situation, is it hard to keep your viewers happy in terms of doing what you've always done, interviewing the Gronks and the Bradys and the Pedroias of the world, but also having to keep feeding that monster that is social media?
Yes, it can be difficult, but it's so, for anybody who's a New England sports writer in this 20-year period to complain about anything would be bizarre. It's helped me send 3 kids to college, because if I was in Arizona covering the Cardinals or Cleveland covering the Browns, who would care? I wouldn't have, a number of Twitter followers. I wouldn't have a number of people who know you. I wouldn't have NFL Films asking to talk to me about this Super Bowl I was out of that one. So it's been tremendous. But yeah, people get pissed at the level of coverage that you give, the tone of your coverage. And I think that over the 17-year period of the Patriots, which I've primarily covered, people are accustomed to a level of enjoyment. This is enjoyment as opposed to, political stuff. So I can write about the dysfunction that the Patriots are experiencing, which is exposed for the first time, really, and laid bare. But at some point, people don't want to hear about it anymore, because this is what they do for enjoyment, and I don't want to look at the field and know that Bill hates Tom and Tom hates Bill, and this is all going to end in 15 minutes, and my kids aren't going to enjoy it. So, and they're a very vocal fan base, to the good. But it's funny, because we started a thing called the Authentic Fan, because we want to speak directly, again, differently from the hard news stuff. We want to speak directly to the fan, and we want to appeal to the fan, and we want to start a conversation. Well, to do that, sometimes you have to be very knee-jerk and opinionated and start an argument. And I sometimes didn't necessarily get into get in an argument, because I'm always right, and I don't want to hear what somebody else has to say. Which is, you have to get your mind around the fact that you have to just lay down your arms, and it's just a sports argument. Don't get all defensive, mister.
Well, and to expand on that a little bit into the news side, do we have to be more provocative in order to get more eyeballs on what we're doing? Is that coming our way as well?
I think the union leader has always been pretty provocative, right, Jeff? Yes. Right? Yep. And it helps. It certainly helps us, right? Like, if we are out there, if we have an opinion first, it's the same on the news side, right? If we have a news story first, if we have an editorial that is taking a position that other people are not taking, it certainly helps us. But the question is the difference between provocative, being first, being right, and that's really a difficult balance for us to figure out every day. So what we try to do is we try and figure out what's going to affect the greatest number of people. Is it a provocative something? Is it a provocative opinion? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what we're always looking for, and that goes back to talking about these audiences. That's one of the many publishing teams that we've set up, is our opinion section, so that we understand what people really care about, and we're not writing editorials, we're not running op-eds that are totally out there. Yeah, they may be provocative, but if nobody's reading them, who cares? So that's one of the things we've really been keen in on, looking at the metrics to understand what are the issues that are affecting people in New Hampshire, what are the opinions that kind of go along with that, and then how can we, again, take those occasional readers and funnel them into paying subscribers.
When you say looking at the metrics, who's looking at them, who's analyzing them, and what metrics are you looking at?
So we're looking at everything from, page views and shares to stuff that's as nitty-gritty as, like, how many different sports stories does somebody need to click on before they hit the paywall and say, we're going to decide to pay for this. And we'll do that for everything: sports, opinion, news, breaking news, politics. And so we have a good idea of, how many people on what it takes to get somebody from just seeing their crazy uncle post something on Facebook to becoming a loyal reader and a subscriber to the union leader. So we're really looking at every metric. And here's the critical part of looking at the metrics. It's not so much about whether or not I understand the metrics. It's about whether the content creators understand the metrics, whether the editors, the reporters, the web producers, whether all of those people get how this headline, how this story that I'm either deciding to put behind the paywall or not, this story that I'm deciding to put on Facebook at this time, how all of that plays together to get those people down into the funnel and make them paid subscribers.
If only we had a content provider here that we could, Daniela, do you get that feedback from your editors, from the folks at the Current?
Every day we get a report from Chartbeat or whatever vendor they use that does exactly that on a very granular level. How long, you can actually see, if you go into the analytics, how long people spent in your story before they turn the page, what the number of engaged minutes were. I mean, and for us, the old idea that page views were king is not even as relevant anymore. We're looking at it, time spent on the story, engagement, because that's the trick to turning people from, sort of casual readers who will, take the freebies to paying subscribers, people who are actually, invested in the product. And it's
And
amazing.
that's an important change because we have a lot of people who are think they're responsible for getting page views, and so they put a lot of clickbait on there. You know, sensitive headlines. You know, maybe a photo that they imply might be more if you open it up and look at it. And so we've got to get away from that and get into people who are really going to read the story and
Exactly.
care about the story and come back for more.
Exactly.
And that's the big challenge because I think once we got all this detailed information, it became seductive to just try to push the page views, and that's really not a measure of the value of that reader.
And like I was going to say, it changes. It changes so quickly from page views to time on site to headlines, and you do need that continuity from, you know, whoever's the editorial person on the web to the people who are the content who are writing the headlines, and then you'll have a headline that is constructed with a word that will hit a search engine, and it kind of misrepresents what the gist of your story was. But hell, it's Twitter, so you got to get we have 140 characters here. You can't write a novel, and it's interesting. And we can put a whole bunch of stuff out on our NBC Sports Boston account, which is the same exact story. But if I tweet it from my personal account with my stupid little head and say something about it, it might get more clicks because they don't go, oh, it's just their automated website doing it. So, but if you do that too often, if you just sit there and be a retweeter or a tweeter, then people are like, oh, it's more white noise out of these guys. So it's the engagement. They have to have that feeling of engagement too, but it's always changing. We've been Facebook Live is important. We've been Periscope is important. And it's hard for a content producer to pin down what do they want exactly from me this week. And I keep coming back to it's information, it's facts, it's an informed opinion delivered entertainingly.
But Daniela, let me ask you, will you get word from an editor like, hey, this story that you did on that subject that really drew a lot of people in, do a follow-up or do more stories that would be related to that as opposed to what's the next thing? I mean, letting you decide, hey, this is what's important today.
Well, I mean, you know, you'd like to say, well, we're not driven by, you know, page views, or we're not driven by engagement time or whatever. We're you know, going to present the news that we think is important. But ultimately, we are responsible to an audience, and we do have an obligation to give people what they want. And if they want more politics, if they want, you know, if they're looking for maybe more detail on certain issues, then we do have a responsibility to give them that. You know, in our newsroom, you know, the stories that really drive traffic and that, you know, do well in terms of engaged time are politics, and anything to do with UConn sports generally does well. And, you know, breaking news, I guess, is, you know, one of the standards. But those are the things people want. And so we do have a responsibility, I think, to our readers to present them what they want. We need to present the information that we need, again, that they need, rather. And that's sort of a sea change in the mindset, because it used to be we were up there, you know, sitting on the king of the mountain, and we were trying to, you know, you guys need this. And now it's more of a two-way street, which is probably a good thing.
Well, let me run something by all of you here, because it's something I think you can all relate to. I know of a situation where when Aaron Hernandez, when that all broke, a news director who said, I want an Aaron Hernandez in every newscast every day as this is going on. Is that the right way to be a news editor?
Did you ask him, well, what's the story? Where's the news, right? I mean, that's, in our newsroom, we use metrics, right? But we use metrics, and we use Facebook messages, and we use Twitter, and we use phone calls and letters to the editor, and these are all tools that we have on top of our news judgment. And so if there's no news story, if there's no follow, we're not doing it. So I guess the short answer to your question is no, that's not right. But we do need to be looking at all these different ways, and I think metrics are, that is an important tool, but we need to be looking at all these different ways that people are now communicating with us to tell us, hey, there is a story here, maybe you guys are missing it, but you need to go out and find it. So is there an Aaron Hernandez story to do every single day? Maybe not, but if people are telling you that you need to find a story, I think it's definitely worth investing the time to see if there is something.
I had a news director once, 25 years ago, who said, I want Princess Diana in every show until the ratings go down, and then we'll do it one more day just to make sure. So we've had that for years, but we've had less, you know, sophisticated metrics to measure whether people are watching. I mean, looking at Nielsen overnight doesn't tell you much about everything in your show. Looking at our website gives us every single story and how many people watched, how many people read, how long they stayed with it. And so you do get better feedback on what people are interested in. But yeah, you don't go out and manufacture a story, but if you see there's interest in it and you can find a legitimate other angle, and sometimes the viewers will give that to us. They'll write us and say, well, what about this? Or you guys never asked that question. And sometimes they're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And they give us the follow-ups themselves.
I don't honestly think it's unfair in the linear platform necessarily, because you can find time to somehow flesh out a witness, a relationship, fallout for the team. I'd sometimes be on NECTA talking about what the ramifications would be for the football team. How do they make a mistake on someone like that? Or what, you could talk to a BU, professor about, psychopaths or bipolar or CTE. There's any number of things which came up during that situation. So there's always something to mine there. What ends up happening, and it is, again, it's the white noise. Oh, another Hernandez story. Oh, another Hernandez story. And then you get into a situation where, as it did with the Hernandez story, it morphed into speculation about his sexual orientation and whether or not that was valid, whether or not that was fair, what the implications if we don't think that's fair, what does that say about us? So it becomes, in feeding the maw, you start to get out on some icebergs that might break off from the main one and it starts to melt around you.
Oh,
but
yeah.
but it's hungry. That maw is hungry.
So there is a certain, but Jeff, what you said about I Want a Princess Diana story, that's more how that struck me. But Tom, as you say, there was a lot to do on Aaron Hernandez. There were so many layers to that story that were perfectly legitimate stories to cover.
Yeah, you know what's funny is you start to, well, here's the contract implications of Hernandez now that he's been released. And he's, okay, there's a murder and there might be 2 others, so let's not talk about the contract implications. But frankly, it's part of the story. It's another element to it. But because you have the social media pushback that you can get, you think that everybody's pissed about that. Well, not everybody. There's plenty of sports fans who wonder what the implications are to that hobby they have of watching the New England Patriots.
Well, and I was actually going to bring that up because, as you say, sports fans, Patriots fans, yeah, I'm sure they do look at, Odin Lloyd and the 2 men in Boston and, those poor victims and their families, but they also think, we lost a tight end here.
doubt.
So you have to cover that angle as well as the rest of it.
And that's what I feel comfortable doing. I just have always, I was an English major. I like to write. I like the context of it. I like the reporting of it. And I think that was, if you ever want to see Bill Belichick at his absolute best, Google Belichick Hernandez press conference at the beginning of training camp in 2013. He spoke for about 25 minutes, and he was remarkable in the things that he related about the things that they tried to do, the mistakes that they made. It shows you a different, aspect to it. But yeah, you have to report on every aspect of it, and you have to do it, especially in the early days, which you guys have to deal with. You have to do it with a lot of gentle care, so you're not trampling over people's feelings or looking like here's the media showing up on the lawn. I wonder how hard that is for you guys. I don't have to do that. I stood on Aaron Hernandez's lawn for 4 days. I said, you know what? It's a news story. Let NECTA stand there.
I was there for longer than 4 days. Are we letting social media then kind of play assignment editor to some extent? I mean, Aaron Hernandez is an extreme example where something obviously that we would cover, but what comes to my mind is, was it Hornsey Twigs, the lost stuffed animal at Logan, which it took off online, so, and I mean, we might have done that story anyway, but I just get the feeling that if something takes off in social media, there's your assignment editor just gave you the story, and it was everybody on Instagram.
I think there's a certain percentage of stories every day you do that with. And then others, as Trent said, you layer your news judgment on top of the viewer response. But there are some that, stories that we probably wouldn't have picked on our own to do, but the website's blowing up with it, people love it, want to hear it. Again, we do have some, it's not obligation, but we do have some need to please some of our viewers. We wouldn't pick every single story that way, but some certainly get picked that way, absolutely.
For us, we look to see if there's a value that we can add to the story. So let's say Twitter is blowing up about it, or that's it's got 100,000 shares on Facebook. Are there is there a set of facts? Is there some reporting? Are there other sides of the story that we can add to it? And if so, we'll do that story. Look, our audience is on Facebook. Our audience is on social media. If our audience is talking about our story, if our audience has questions, even if they are expressing those questions on social media, and even if we feel like, hey, wait, we kind of missed the boat here, everyone's already talking about this, like we're late to the game, are we letting social media be our assignment editor, or are we just listening to what people want? And I think that if we can jump in there and add something to whatever people are talking about, if we can either take the conversation to a new level, or we can, kind of you see Facebook posts and you're like, where are the facts here? What the heck is going on? If we can do something to help people understand and give context, I think there's nothing wrong with it.
Anyone with anything else to add? That's all we have time for. Thank you for listening, and thank you all for taking part.